son was calling from school.
I figured it was an actual reason for that. So
There's like a real reason when I do that.
Madam Chair, we are now live.
Thank you very much. All right, well, welcome everyone. Hold on. See, I should have been more prepared. I got caught off guard with the whole leading the meeting thing. Welcome to today's meeting. There it is. Thank you, Mr. Moya. So I would like to call this Intergovernmental Legislative Relations Committee meeting to order. Sounded weird. Today's Thursday, January 27th, 2022, and we do have a quorum present. We are waiting on Councillor Pena to arrive, but expect her shortly. And for those of you watching, you probably know that you can watch this on Zoom. So thank you for being here. Our first order of business today is to elect a new vice chair of the committee. And I would like to entertain nominations. And I guess that would be from me because Councillor Pena is not here yet. So I would like to nominate Councillor Feeblecorn to be the vice chair of our committee for this next year.
I will second that.
Thank you. Do we need to do a roll call on this tiny little committee?
Madam Chair, just for safety, if that's all right, just in case. I don't know if the rules are, State Open Act rules are for a Zoom meeting.
I'm good with that. So you want to do that, Mr. Minicucci? Or?
Yes. Okay. Councillor Bassan?
Yes.
Yes. Councillor Feeblecorn?
yes.
Director Padilla?
Yes.
Yes. Chief of Staff Pooley?
Yes.
Madam, it's unanimous.
Thank you very much. So
Congratulations.
That's how that went for me last year, by the way.
Very
Surprise.
nice.
So thank you. The next order of business, I did see Mr. Thompson pop on just a moment ago.
Oh, Madam Chair?
Yeah, yes.
Just a procedural matter. If Councillor Feeblecorn can just go ahead and grant you permission to continue on as meeting chair since for.
Oh, thank you.
Do I need to make a motion, Tom, or just?
I think you just gotta say it's all right. Go ahead.
I definitely want Councillor Bassan to continue this meeting.
Okay, well, thank you. See, we need more Robert's Rules training. So, Mr. Thompson, welcome. And if you wouldn't mind, I'm sure that you are having lots of spare time up there. So if you don't mind giving us an update, we'd be grateful.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. Yeah, the deadline for having legislators pull capital outlay projects into their universe is technically Sunday on the 30th, probably around 5. But we are acting as if the deadline is Friday at 5 because most legislative assistants will be gone, and they aren't working this weekend. So we've created that deadline for ourselves to have all of our projects pulled into the respective universes of the legislature by 5 p.m. tomorrow. We've received, we're doing really well in terms of just getting that part of it done. There's a whole other phase that comes after that, obviously, and that's when legislators will begin to actually make decisions about which projects they will fund. But that's where we are right now on that. Here in the week, we finished the process that was related to House Bill 2 Junior, which for whatever reason they put before they put the General Appropriations Act. I'm sorry, somebody's got some paper or something going that's very loud. I don't know who that might be. Okay, so anyway, Madam Chair, this is like the setup week, so like this is the week that sets up everything that follows. And I will say the feedback that I have gotten from legislators, and I've talked to many, many legislators in the last few days, is that they are really, really appreciative of the way the administration has sent out the books and everything with the priorities in it. and also the efforts by the counselors and the staff to make sure that they're well prepared and know exactly where we're all coming from. So kudos to you, Madam Chair, and everybody for, I think, putting our best foot forward. And I just, I'm trying to make sure that none of those projects we have slip through the cracks. We very much appreciated the email we got yesterday. I think Mr. Menicucci sent it out on that final way to sort of catch a project that maybe didn't get put in time. And so thank you for that, Tom. And so I feel like I don't feel like we're missing anything, but we do still have to finish very strong the next couple of days to make sure that all of our projects can be considered.
Thank you, Mr. Thompson. Does anybody have questions for Mr. Thompson right now?
Question.
Go ahead, Councilor Feeble-Corn.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I definitely think we're doing a great job on capital outlay. I've heard the same thing from legislators, but I'm just wondering, in addition to the capital outlay, Mr. Thompson, how is lobbying particular bills on behalf of the city going, and what bills are you really working on the most?
Madam Chair and Councilor Feeble-Corn, I am mostly in charge of responsible for capital, so I will stand up from time to time if I'm asked to testify on the city's support on a specific bill or appropriation. I haven't done any of that yet, but in the past, I guess looking at it from a council perspective, 2 or 3 times a session, a counselor will call me to either ask me to go in and talk specifically to a member about their position on something, or to transmit to a committee that position. So I'm certainly available to do that. But most of the policy stuff is done by Mr. Jaramillo. I'm not sure if he's on this call.
Thank you.
And I don't think
Chair,
Go ahead.
Mr. Armillo had to excuse himself. He has 2 committee meetings he's attending at once.
Okay, well, we'll be sure at the next meeting, I think, if he's here, we can follow up too and find out some of that process as well. Any other questions? And I have one. So Mr. Thompson, is there a way that you recommend us just to make sure that we haven't missed those slipping through the cracks, or just make sure to keep doing what we've been doing?
Madam Chair, my recommendation is for us to keep doing what we're doing. And then, we're going to make one last lap around tomorrow afternoon and talk to each of those legislative assistants to make sure they're not missing anything. To the degree they'll let us look at where their universes are, we're going to try and do that. So I guess if there are any counselors that feel like, hey, we're uncertain about X specific project, if you would let me know, then I would make sure that would be on my list to follow up to make sure that folks have it.
Okay, thank you.
And Madam Chair, I'm sorry, one thought I should have brought up. Joe, if you could please connect on the sawmill project in particular. I got a call today with some more detail about that. So when we're done, if you want to give me a call, I can tell you the information we pulled together from that phone call.
Madam Chair and Mr. Pulley, I'm totally plugged in on that. I had visited with the advocates on the sawmill project, and I'm aware of that discrepancy. And but thank you.
Thanks.
Wonderful. Well, thank you, Mr. Thompson, for being here. And if you want to stick around, you can. But I also realize that you probably have some better things to do. Go do those laps, sir.
Madam Chair.
Thank you, everyone. Appreciate it very much.
Real quickly, just ask so Mr. Joe knows also, Madam Chair, if that's all right.
Sure.
Yeah, just that Ms. Romero is working with the policy analysts. She's on the line, Dave, but she's working with them there to help them get letters out from the last round of letters from the counselors to legislators, a couple of them. And she's also encouraging them to reach out to constituents who are interested in various projects, for them to reach out to legislators and let them know that, these are projects that their constituents are interested in. So those are 2 efforts that will be underway during next week.
Tom, if I can just jump in on that. This is Elaine. Joe, you should be getting
Go ahead,
copies.
Mr. Romero.
Thank you so much. I apologize, Counselor. You should be getting copied on those as of today and throughout tomorrow. So if you can keep your eyes on them, because it does include all of the projects. I know Counselor Passan has been to Santa Fe working directly with the legislators. There are others that are going electronically and hoping that we get all of that and your backing for them. So thank you, Tom. Thank you, Counselor.
Thank you.
Understood, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Okay, so moving on to our next agenda item, then we will go on to our federal. Mr. John O'Donnell, if you want to give us an update for our federal priorities in that agenda item, that would be wonderful. Mr. O'Donnell, you are currently the winner of being on mute.
Am I now unmuted?
You are unmuted, sir.
All right. Well, now I can be heard when I say thank you, Madam Chairman and members of the committee. Let me just say one thing about legislation here, and that's the last time we talked a week ago, I said that the FY22 appropriations, which is still under consideration by Congress, looked like it might be headed towards a final decision on that legislation in February, maybe late February, early March. Yesterday, Mr. Pagonis and myself had conversations with House Appropriations staffers, and then today with a former Senate Appropriations staffer, who have said that they think there is a likelihood towards the end of February, maybe early March, of them wrapping up the FY22 appropriations bills. The significance of that to the city is that we have 4 projects in appropriations bills that, if they pass the FY22 appropriations bill, the funding for those projects should come through. So now I will turn to where we are with the current program. And over the past week, Mr. Padilla and Mr. Manacucci have worked with us to assemble a list, which we said we would bring back to the committee today, of projects which are both a combination of administration priorities and council priorities. The total number that we have on the list is 37, and I don't know whether Mr. Manacucci has that document. We don't need to go through it. I just wanted you to know that we've done that combined list, and we have 37 projects. Roughly going through the list, it appears to us that there are probably 14 of those projects that might lend themselves to an earmark or a grant. There are 21 of the projects which seem to lend themselves primarily to a grant. And then there are 2 requests that actually might be addressed through technical assistance. One of those is in the public safety area, and the COPS program under the Justice Department does do some technical assistance, including having people visit a location and do technical assistance work there. So it's a total of 37. What we now need to do is, and during this next week and before your next meeting, Mr. Manacucci, Mr. Padilla, and Mr. Pagonis and myself are going to go through the list of projects and make some recommendations on the ones that we think would be most competitive in the area of earmarks and grants. And so we will be doing that before next Thursday. Mr. Manacucci, did you want to add anything to our discussion we had earlier today?
Yeah, but basically, Madam Chair, I think what we'd like to do regarding the prioritization is, before we do that, commence with that, because that could result in that when you go to the full council, there could be some projects, of course, will be ranked higher than others. We should also reckon we probably want the permission of we'd like to ask the permission of the committee to do that, so that we're doing this upon request of the IGR, because that way people whose projects aren't ranked as high know that it wasn't just staff acting arbitrarily. The other thing though to point out is that a lot of that this form is still just potential grants. So what it just does is it just kind of, as it really informs more the city than it does the federal government as to if we're going to put some efforts into grant funding, which will be the most likely to return funds. And for the purposes of informing our congressional delegation, it's mostly just to give them the list of what could be coming forward. That's how the prioritization would work.
And let me add to this, that in terms of the grant funding for projects, and that applies to all of these projects listed, we have the American Rescue Plan Act funding. Some of that funding is still available, and I'll address that in a moment. We also have the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act funding, and some of these might fit into that funding program. And then, as we've noted, there are, and we expect to be, there to be FY23 earmarks. So there are several sources of funding for some of these projects. And one that we just learned about this afternoon was funded under the American Rescue Plan Act, and it was listed as capital funding, and it's $10 billion. The state of New Mexico, according to the Treasury website, is going to receive $133 million in additional funding allocated under this capital projects category. We'll send you more information on that, but our first review of that announcement is that there are some programs. You can't build highways or bridges with this money, but some of it could be available for schools and some social programs. So we'll get the guidance, the eligibility out to you, and we'll make sure that Mr. Padilla and Mr. Menacucci have that information. So as we look through this project list, there may be some opportunities there for you to get money from the state. This money will go to the state, and I suspect that whoever in Santa Fe has been managing the ARPA money, the second COVID allocation, is going to be the person or persons who will be in control of this money. Are there any questions? Pardon me?
Mr. Padilla has a question.
With this money, is it like a part of ARPA, or is it going to be, so, you know, some money goes to the state and their federal grants, and then the federal grants, the administration just figures out who it's going to be spent?
This money was allocated, was authorized and appropriated in the second COVID bill, the American Rescue Plan Act. And Treasury had not done anything about putting this money out until it developed the guidelines for it, which they just came out with. So the money goes to the state, and it will be making it, the state of New Mexico will make a determination about which projects to fund.
So this Madam Chair, so it's possible that this might need to be appropriated by the state legislature based on a recent court ruling. So, Madam Chair, when you do get the guidelines, yeah, if you could forward that to us, then what I can do is look and see if it's gonna have to run through the state legislature, or if it's gonna be the executive branch that distributes that money.
Okay. Will do.
Mr. O'Donnell, how fast do you think that these guidelines will come out for that? I mean,
well, the eligibility criteria is already out. It's a matter of how quickly that money gets transferred from Treasury to the state of New Mexico. I would expect, because of this announcement, I would expect that this money would be there very soon, if not, next week.
well, thank you,
But the
Mr.
state,
O'Donnell.
now, I should add this, there is this, and it will affect, and I'm glad you asked that question. The state has to submit a plan about how they plan to use this $133 million by, I think it's September 24th.
So
Again, this goes back to whoever's running that ARPA money in Santa Fe is the person or people you want to be talking to.
okay. You got my wheels spinning, sir.
I can see the smoke in the background.
I'm sure. Thank you. Any other questions for this part of the topic, the conversation?
Madam Chair,
Yes.
if I could just ask Mr. O'Donnell to explain. So regarding the prioritization, which we're going to ask your permission, Mr. O'Donnell, we rely on him to provide the best path forward to advocate for the city and Washington. So, and I want to make sure I understand it correctly. He asked this morning if we could prioritize these projects, and just if he could explain, because I believe the reason is that he's trying to find the most effective way for us to obtain funding. And again, your project prioritization occurs each year, so one project may not make it high this year, but maybe the next year. But if I could have Mr. O'Donnell kind of explain the advantages of prioritization, that would be helpful.
Well,
Yes, Mr. O'Donnell?
Sure, Madam Chairman. The prioritization actually happens in several ways. One is, and Mr. Padilla did a good job on this in the submission that he made for administration projects, because he went and compared requests to eligible accounts in the appropriations bills. And that is one way that a priority gets established, if there's funding there for that particular project or request. The other way it is done by us is looking at is the project ready for implementation, and what's the cost of the project? And that is one thing that Mr. Menicucci and Mr. Padilla and my office will be working on during this next week. We may not have exact dollar figures, but we've got to know, is this project ready to be funded, and what is the amount of funding that's being requested? What do we think that funding is going to look like? So while we'll come back next week with some recommendations, I suspect that there'll be further conversations before this committee about the priorities and which one of the projects are most competitive for earmarks or grants. It's not going to be final as of next week. I think we'll have to have more discussions about that in another IGR meeting.
Okay. Well, and I know that I personally appreciate the expertise and opinion of you all kind of helping us whittle down what you think will be the most effective. And so I don't want to speak on behalf of the entire committee, but at the same time, I think that it is very beneficial to do it in this direction than have us come to you with our recommendations on priorities.
And Madam Chairman, I think there's significant funding, federal funding, as you're aware, that's been provided through the COVID funding and through the Infrastructure Investment Act. We don't know what's going to happen with the Build Back Better reconciliation package. That has, it does have some additional spending for programs like housing and we expect childcare, but we'll see where that happens. So this list that we put together is, I would say it's dynamic, and it's going to be affected by different funding opportunities during the year. So when some projects maybe at this point look like they're very strong in terms of their competitiveness at the federal level once submitted as an earmark or a grant, that doesn't mean that there won't be other opportunities through the year to fund some of the other projects.
Okay. Any other questions from the committee? Any more updates, Mr. O'Donnell?
No, I don't think so. Let me ask Kyriakis, do you have anything to add? Okay. Not at this time.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Menicucci, am I leaving anything off?
Yeah, if you could just ask for the committee's consent for us to go ahead and prioritize it.
I knew I was going to forget that part that we talked about. Thank you, Mr. Menicucci. Well, I know that I stated my opinion first, which should have been last, but what do you all think, committee? Do you think that, do you want to prioritize it ourselves? Do we consent to this plan of action with having Mr. O'Donnell and Mr. Padilla and Mr. Minicucci kind of whittle it down for us?
Madam Chair, I'm fine with that process of letting Mr. Minicucci and Mr. Padilla do it.
Okay, Councilor Pena?
I was just going to say, I'm fine with the process. I apologize for being a little late to the meeting. I just, I do understand what Mr. O'Donnell's talking about. I know we've been talking about this for a while of just really consolidating the list, which makes it difficult when you have several priorities from the administration and several priorities from each of the city councilors. I guess I must have missed something early on, but I do know that I thought we were kind of putting this whole list, kind of this alphabet soup of all the priorities together as an attachment, just so that we have them in there, but that when opportunities are available, those, and it's kind of, to me, it sounds kind of like what you're trying to do. So when those opportunities are available, you would identify of that alphabet soup, which opportunity that we have the most potential of getting. So I just know that, I know we've tried this for several years to kind of whittle down the list. I think we've done good compared to what it was in the past, but I think the attachment was the solution that we all had in mind to kind of accomplish that. So if I'm wrong, I apologize again for being late.
Madam Chair?
Yep, Mr. Minicucci and then Mr. O'Donnell as well.
Yeah. So Councilor Pena, we will take no projects off the list or off the attachments. So the attachments will still have all the projects. What it will do is it will just, for attachment 3, just attachment 3, we will rank them by what is most viable to obtain funding for this next fiscal year, is what will happen.
Okay.
Mr. O'Donnell?
Madam Chairman, Councilor Pena, one of the things that drives this list, prioritizing, if you will, this list, is the earmarking process. If we didn't have earmarking right now, we would be talking about just this list, and as you say, it identifies those projects where we need to keep our eyes open for project funding through grants. The reason we talk about the earmarks and prioritization is because we'll be asked that by the congressional delegation. What is the, if you've got, and we had to do this FY22, what are your top projects? And we submitted 8, and they were listed in priority for the benefit of the congressional delegation, because they simply want to know where should we be spending our time and effort here. So all the projects listed are critical, and all of them will receive our attention and are looking for opportunities to fund them.
Mr. Padilla?
Madam Chair, what I think that we should also do then is, if there is going to be a rank, then it should be a rank by account. So this way you divide it up. I don't think since each account it's a whole different game across each account. So I think it'll be important to do that as well.
Madam Chair?
Go ahead, Mr. O'Donnell.
I want to, that's a good point, Mr. Padilla, and I want to just amplify on that a moment. What Mr. Padilla is saying is there are so many, I think it was 32 federal program accounts were eligible for earmarking on the House side. The Senate side, it was a little bit more. What we don't want to do, and this will have an impact on the projects that we recommend for earmark funding, is you don't want to have 8 projects or 4 projects, if you can avoid it, out of the same federal account. And there's one account that Mr. Minicucci, Mr. Padilla, Mr. Pagonis, and myself had talked about in terms of this FY22. They're under the Transportation and HUD subcommittee. There's an account called Economic Development Initiatives. Well, And I think our original, the 8 earmarks that were submitted, advanced by the congressional delegation, 4 or 5, and I think it was 5, were EDI requests. So what you wind up with, these members, when they go and submit the request to an appropriations committee, we have 5 projects in essence competing against one another, not just the other, sponsors of these earmarks from other places. So Mr. Padilla wisely talked to, in a conversation that he and Mr. Manacucci had with us, we talked about, let's look when we're evaluating to see just how many we've got in the same account for requests. Doesn't mean that we can't have several, but we just need to be aware of that. Did I make that clear, or are there still questions?
Well, I think what I understand, and so I guess correct me if I'm wrong, is that you're almost prioritizing if it's in the same account, then we need to prioritize even within that so that we don't have them competing.
And that did happen this last year. I mean, it just did, in the way that things worked through the process.
Okay. Any other questions, counselors? Counselor Feeblecorn, how do you feel about proceeding with the plan of having Mr. O'Donnell, Mr. Manacucci, and Mr. Padilla kind of whittle away and do the priorities list for next week?
Madam Chair, I support that.
And I get technically, Mr. Padilla, how do you feel about it?
I support that.
I think we have everybody's opinion then now. Does that count as a decent roll call vote? Okay. All right. Any other questions? And now did I get it all, Mr. Manacucci?
You've got it all, Madam Chair, and just for next week, we'll send out next week's agenda Monday, but it should be fairly similar to this week's, except we will not have election of a vice chair.
Congratulations to our new Vice Chair Feeblecorn. Thank you all for your time and for being here. And I will now say, with no further business, this meeting is adjourned.
Thank you.
Thank you.
See you soon.